Thank you again for joining us on Teacher Podcast. For those of us that don't know you, can you please tell us a little bit about yourself, Tim?
Sure. So I have been an art teacher in high school for 25 years in Smithtown, New York, and that's on Long Island. Now I'm currently in a role of an edtech coach. So I'm working in the secondary, 3 middle schools and 2 high schools, helping teachers integrate technology. I also work at a college. I work at Five Towns teaching emerging technology and film. And I'm also author of the book Steam Power from ISTE. So, I'm a big advocate of STEAM. I'm an artist myself. I love creativity and especially creative use of new technology. That's kind of like where my heart is. So I love sharing that any way I can.
That's awesome. So it's great that you have that background and that you've taken that and brought it over into gamification. So that's going to be where we're going to kind of center our focus. But again, we can go either way today, but we're going to talk about gamification in education and how educators can use this as a way to engage their students. So firstly, how did you get started with this idea and concept of gamification in education? Can you talk to us about that?
Sure. I mean, for me, I always just wanted to connect with students in whatever way was authentic. And I love games. I love gamification. Like I'm a big fan of things like Harry Potter. So like when we could sort our classroom into different houses, and it motivates students, like that just seemed like a fun idea. So, I was always just experimenting with it. Originally, I had heard that term gamification. I didn't totally understand what it meant. And, I like to have students create their own games. I like to play games in the classroom, and I like to use gamification. So kind of everything in the full breadth of gaming. And I think, even, if you want to extend that to like, e-games, like there's a huge, realm of really kind of exciting things happening with gaming in schools. So, I love playing with all of that really in any kind of way.
For me as a former teacher, that kind of word scares me. It sounds overwhelming, but as you were describing, as you were describing separating into the Harry Potter classes, it sparked a memory. It was my 6th grade class and I forget exactly what she was teaching us because it was history, but she was teaching us something, but we were all grouped into little troops or like what were we? Like I don't even remember. Troops will be the word that I will use. But that's a way of gamifying it because what we were learning, each table was its own sector. We all had to come up with game plans, but we were also learning at the same time. So that word, even though it is a little bit overwhelming, you can do simple things like that to help engage your students. Yeah. So in your professional opinion, can you use gamification across all levels of education?
Yeah. Oh, yeah, definitely. I mean, little kids love playing. I mean, play is important in school. I think that like, elementary school, they know play is important. And in high school, like I'm one of the big advocates of like continuing to play. I think that's a big part of like educational technology is that it's fun. So I think you could definitely use it across any discipline, across any level. And really in any scenario, you don't need super high tech to do it either. And I think that's kind of key. And it also teaches things like collaboration. I think like learning to work together as a team is really, really helpful. I think collaboration is a huge asset to anyone. And it's something that we do get better at. Like you learn how to collaborate with people. So that's another factor of gamification. There's things like badges and, I know, I'm a big gamer myself. I love playing like games like Pokemon Go. And I remember, I'm really trying to check off all the little boxes and get all the little badges. And it's like, it does motivate me. So if it works on me, I know it works with students too. So yeah, absolutely. And I think it even works with adults. I think, if you do it with PD, I think, it's nice to get totally effective.
Oh yeah. I think a lot of teachers are like, okay, games. And they're like, okay, these kids are already playing games. But I think it's so great. And I think for you, because you're taking the art and you're bringing into the game realm as well. Can you kind of help us see how that comes together? Will you discuss that for us for a little bit?
Yeah. So like, this is one of the fun things. I mean, like any opportunity to be creative. So like, I love having students actually create their own games. And we use tools like Kami, and it's like, all you need is like a PDF, and then you could really set up your own game and you make your pieces. So it's like, I was excited to see sort of that facet come out. And, working with students to create games is really fun. You could integrate different kinds of tech with 3D printing or cardboard. It doesn't matter.
Yeah.
But, it makes learning fun. And I think whenever you're able to really have one of those projects that is really different and stands out, they really stick with students. They remember that learning. And, when it doesn't feel like a typical classroom, that's always kind of special. I think it really works really well.
Yeah. Elementary knows play is important. And then what? And then you go into middle school and bom, 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 evil, like we said earlier, live is evil. And it's so interesting because I formerly taught kindergarten. Play is important. They need to move. They need to do things. But at what point in public education in the past, it's kind of shifting now, but there's a point where all of that gets pushed aside. And then now you got to sit in your desk. You got to take notes. And then education isn't fun. It's not engaging. It's not reaching the students where they're at. So that was a really interesting point that you made, that elementary has done it. And even probably early elementary, they shift. I would probably say 5th grade is the cutoff when it's no longer fun. And now you have to do X, Y, Z. So that was an interesting point. I think it could be
traumatic when that happens. So I could remember that kind of shift, and it's like all of a sudden, school became a lot more difficult. And I think being an artist, it's easy to kind of adopt that kind of fun perspective and to have that unique ability to be playful. And I think that people like Picasso, famous artists, are kind of famous for looking at the world differently and finding interesting ways to really play with materials. So, it's nice to give students license to do that when they're older.
Yeah.
And, the testing and things like that really kind of, between the testing and the pandemic, students were really pretty downtrodden. So it's nice to bring that livelihood back to the classroom and sort of have people work together and do these fun, unique challenges. And, the nice thing about gamification is that there's so many different ways to do it. I like to cater it to the students that I'm working with. What are their personalities? What are their interests? What are they watching on TV? What are they listening to? You think about all of those kind of things and you really cater it, specifically to your audience, and that's going to be more powerful too. So, you can make it work in any scenario. And I think that's really, really important factor too.
Well, can you kind of extend that thought? Because let's say you have some teachers who are like, okay, I'm getting to this gamification idea and I want to integrate it into my classroom. I want to put it into my curriculum. Where would they go? How do they get started? Where would they go to kind of get this going into their own realm and their world, into the classrooms?
It's a good question. As an edtech coach, I walk into a classroom and, you look at the personality of the teacher in the classroom, and I think every class has a personality. So, it's going to be different for different people. Good. Yeah, it does. It's really actually an important thing to consider because, it needs to be authentic. You don't want to force something or try to make something work for everyone. I think, adapting it to the situation is key. Back in my day when I was in school, we had there was the wall and you'd get a star when you did something good. I mean, that's a really base level kind of gamification. So, these days we're on the computers a lot more. You're able to create your own badges and things like that you could give to students. So when you kind of could create a storyline of any kind. So you can create your, I like involving the students. So when they're part of the process, I think it's a little bit more powerful. So we'll create our own storylines. And, you have to get badges along the way to sort of, complete the challenge. And there's something that's really rewarding, even if it's just a couple badges. There's something really rewarding about gaining all the knowledge and, checking off all the badges and then having that complete set and knowing that you learned something and, then reflecting on it and seeing all of the different pieces that you learned in the process. So, it's helpful too, from an assessment point of view, because, you have almost like a map of what you learned, which is nice too.
Now, you just messed some people up right there because you just introduced an idea of assessing through gamification. Now, somebody some veteran teachers gonna look at you sideways, Tim. You're gonna have some issues going on there. Now, you just ruffled some feathers. Now, do you wanna dive into that? Now, are you, because that's something that's really important to me, because I believe assessment takes on many different forms and facets. And I think assessment really means what it says. It's really finding out what a child does or does, or a pupil or a student does or does not know. And so I just think that's a really strong point, that whatever mode that a child is in, you can assess and find out what they know. So that's a great point. And using gamification would be a great way to do that. So yeah, that's perfect to me.
I think it's really helpful, especially like as an educator. You think of like, what are the most important things I want these students to come away with, right? So like, I'm an artist, and it's like, I want everyone to learn creativity. I want them to learn collaboration. So like literally make those challenges, make those badges, come up with things that would fit that, and then work backwards. And it's like, I love, sometimes schools do it as a school district. We want all the students to come away with certain ideas. So like whether it's, climate change or, STEM or STEAM or whatever, there's all different ways to approach it. But like, it is a nice way to, really be sure of all of the students getting a base knowledge of the things that you really care about. So I think it's helpful in that regard too. And it's nice when you kind of know that like you've hit that kind of bar, and then you can have it measurable too. I mean, I finished a degree in educational administration. So like, I know data is something that's really important.
Oh, come on. That's it there.
Yeah. So it's like when you have like measurable results and you have, this is the bar that we're hitting, it's like, it's really helpful.
And I liked your idea of, well, one, doing it as a school district, but also as a classroom. So bringing all the students together and being like, look, we've done this throughout the school year, rather than just checking off, these are our learning objectives. Like,
oh, good.
Almost good, more tangible things that they've accomplished as a whole group and as individual students. So we talked about gamification being a little bit overwhelming, that big word, but you as an expert and as a teacher, how would a teacher go about creating something new to use? I know we talked about very surface level, maybe a badge program, but kind of that basic first step.
There's a lot of ways. And I think, one of the things is, we're in a day and age where teachers are so connected. I mean, like there's great communities. I know like there's the Kami community online, and people are really open about sharing and helping each other. And I think as a teacher, like I made the decision a long time ago just to share everything, just put it out there. I'm a teacher. It's not just this class, you want to teach the world. So it's like you share all of your resources. So I think that, also taking a look at the ways that different teachers use games and gamification and using some of those resources and adapting them to yourself. It's so much easier to kind of remix something than start from scratch, especially if it's your first time doing it or you haven't tried it before. And I really like collaborating with the students. I think that's a really helpful approach. It's more realistic. In the real world, it's not like it's us and them. It's like, we all work together. And like, I've said before, like, I have no idea how this is going to work, but we will figure it out together. And I think that's a great modeling of like the real learning process in the world. Cause it's like, there's so many jobs that I kind of went into and it's like, you don't know the full aspect of what you're getting into. And, you figure it out together. And just that process of learning how to figure things out together is, a great learning moment by itself.
That's awesome. And I know that, so because I know that when 2020 came and, we all had to change the way that we approached education. I mean, education now in 2022, almost 2023, wow, right around the corner, looks way different than education used to. And now we've introduced this new concept, right, of gamification. So in your expert opinion, again, do you feel that gamification is like the way of the future? Like, do you feel like it's one of those things where you just like, hey, educators, you really need to get on board. Like, this is what kids are going to be doing in the future?
I think it's a big factor of the future of education. There's no question. I mean, gaming in general is just such a major industry. It's one of the biggest industries we have in the world. I mean, like, it's like, if you look at the amount of time spent and, there's the things like the metaverse and like, there's all these kind of emerging areas. And it's like the metaverse essentially is a land of gamification. I mean, like it's all games and gamification there. And it's like, when big companies like Facebook change their name to Meta, like that's a little idea of how big this will be in the future. So
Wow.
I think it's really helpful to, give students some experience with that world and sort of how to actually use it, even to motivate yourself. I mean, like, I use these tools myself to kind of trick myself into motivating myself to get stuff done. It's really effective. And like when you could
Yeah.
make your work fun, I think it's important. And I think that, we've seen, I think probably the pandemic taught us a lot of how important games and gamification is. I think, there's so many sort of online tools that, have some gamification elements to it. And it's just like whenever anything is effective at really motivating students to learn, you have to kind of buy into that. I think there's no question, like the results are the answer. So it's definitely a big part of the future. There's emerging tech that might go well with it. Things like virtual reality, really interesting. Like, where that goes. Certainly augmented reality is a little bit more cost effective now. But you could kind of tie in all these different tools. Like I love, 3D printing or laser etching and, all these different kind of tools. And then of course, I'm a big advocate of just design. So, design is something you could do with almost no materials. You could do it very simply, have students create their own characters, have students create their own storylines, and if you base it on your curriculum, that's really amazing learning. Plus, you have those games and gamified tools to kind of use again in the classroom after that experience. So it's nice when you kind of create something that actually can go out in the community and teach the community a little bit about what you're doing or students in the future. So that's powerful too.
Well, I love that you've not just allowed the kids not just to be in front of the game, but you've taken them behind the game as well and let them know, hey, you don't just have to play them, but you can be the ones to design and create them as
Yeah.
well. Because I think that opens up a whole new world. It releases this whole new concept of being the designers of what it is that you're playing as well. Because that's just that creates a whole new opportunity for them as students, and it releases them into this whole new realm of learning. And so I think that's very strong for educators to latch on and say, hey, I can teach this way, I can educate this way. And I think that's very strong. So I just love what you're doing, and I think it's great to change perceptions for teachers
Yeah.
to buy in and say, I can teach this way. That's super strong. Because I know when I started in education, it was like, no, get this textbook and let's teach this way. So I think platforms like this where we're shaping, that's really strong. So that's good. That's really cool.
Yeah, when you're creating, it's just so much more engaging. And I think
Yeah.
teachers all know that, like, when you have to teach something, you have to know it a little bit better. So, like, when you're creating your own
Uh-huh.
games, like, you really have to know your material
Yeah.
well. So,
Yeah.
it's a much better way to actually learn something if you have to teach it to someone else. So
That's
it's great.
good.
Like we've created games that we then shared with other levels or other classes, and then the students are creating instructions and things like that. You're using computational thinking. You're able to tie in all of these, so you're using design thinking to make the game. You're using computational thinking
Oh,
to create the instructions, and it's tying in all of these different thinking methods. That's also
yeah.
really helpful. So it's like, you're really able to, one of the things I like about games and gamification is just, it's really elastic, right? Any situation will work. Any group of students, you
Yeah.
just need to cater it to the place. That's it.
That's good.
And it puts them in charge of their learning too. So
Yeah.
Yeah.
you're not just that teacher up at the front on the board that's, I guess, the Charlie Brown when you're like, wah, 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 wah. Like they no longer,
Right.
that's not, you're putting it more in the power of the students. And we were talking about resources for teachers. And at the beginning of this chat, you mentioned your book, The STEAM Power Infusing Art into Your STEM Curriculum. Can you tell us more about that book? What kind of inspired you to write it, and where we can find it, where the people listening can find it?
Sure. Yeah. Thank you. I wrote the book, because I've been teaching for 25 years. And like I said, I wanted to just kind of share what works. So I just took 18 of my favorite projects and basically put them together. It was a presentation I was doing at conferences. And when I even pitched the book, it was a slideshow presentation. I didn't pitch it as a written book. So, I'm really visual, and it's like I did the illustrations for it, and I created, you can see the 3D print above me for the cover. So it's like I wanted to make sure that, it was, I know teachers, I know like our time is limited. So I broke it down and tried to make it as easy as read. And my hope was that it was just a gift to teachers. Like, here's the stuff that worked well with me. And I started out with cardboard, and then I went through just tons of different types of technology until you get to robotics and drones and 3D printing. So a little bit of
Wow.
everything.
Oh,
So
yeah.
yeah, it's
That's
a
good.
big gamut. And then like the things that I have found that really will elevate that to the next level, like collaboration globally with other classrooms and things like that. So, all of the things that I've learned as a teacher, because it's like, I see teachers retire and it's like, you have these 30 or 40 years of knowledge, and it's like you hit mastery. It's like you really want to pass that on. I think that's an important thing. So I just wanted to share and put, the things that work the best for me out there.
And
Wow.
I love how you
That's good.
break it down because, again, like gamification is terrifying. A lot of people, science, art, and music is
Yeah.
terrifying because they're like, I don't
Yeah.
know what that is. I'm just gonna
Right.
not do it. So
That's true.
you breaking it down to, hey, do you have cardboard? If you have cardboard, you can
Yep.
do
Yeah.
this. So
That's
making it
good.
easy, but also making it challenge for a teacher too. So if they want to go into more of that robotics or farther than just cardboard,
Hmm.
um, that's great. And it brings me up memories of my first year teaching. I always wanted to do art and music in my class. Like music and art are my thing. And I remember my master teacher came into my classroom and we had like some art project up and she's like, "When did you have time for that?" And I was like, "But I made it part of like our math lesson. Like we did a math lesson and then they created some kind of art project with it." So I love that you simplified it for those master teachers that do have all of that knowledge, but maybe also haven't stepped outside of their box to bring that to the students. So very, very cool.
Well, one of the things is you put the book out there and then you get all these other people kind of like sharing things back. So it's like it almost creates this community of knowledge. So it's just so great to kind of see that, because I included QR codes and things like that and resources. And one of the nicest things about, writing a book is that you get introduced to just whole worlds of new people, and you can see how it affects them and see what they learn. So, I'm working on a children's book version of it now. So to kind of work with it in
Oh,
elementary school.
great. Yeah.
So
That's
I'm excited about
awesome.
that.
Any other thoughts? Like anything else you would like to share about gamification to teachers? Anything else that you just want us to know? Any other good stuff?
Well, I could talk about this stuff for hours, but I would say, like, some of the things that work the best, I have found work well from kindergarten all the way through college. So it's like there's some things that are just kind of universal. So like those are always really good things to begin with if you're going to try this for the first time. So yeah, I would say definitely involving the students in the process is key. Knowing your audience, thinking about like what do they like, what's going to motivate them, what do they care about. For some people that's been like characters, so for some people that's been, kind of taking elements of what they're already interested in. For some people, it's going to be, actually collaboration and I think it's important. One of the nice things about gamification is that it also allows all students to participate in a meaningful way. So like, you find, what your skill set is and like what your strengths are, but then also work with people to focus on their strengths. So it's like, you learn a little bit about how you can contribute. So, to make the gamification itself a project-based learning tool is really key. So, we've done some things like I love starting in the classroom and then pushing it out to the school and community. So we've taken some of the games and gamification we've done and then created larger scale things that the school wide, could do, like creating a QR art gallery that's interactive and things like that. And, there's all ways now with technology to, anything that works to actually scale it up and then bring it out to the community. And then that becomes a much bigger thing. And then it turns into like a legacy project for schools. So
Oh
that's my
man.
advice for people that want to try it.
I think that the way you explain it makes it a place, a stepping point where you could at least put your feet in and just
Yeah.
try. And it's encouraging to just start. And I love where I encourage people to try that book. I could do cardboard.
Yeah. That's, the nice thing about cardboard is like there's times of the year that like all the books or stuff come and it's like there's all that extra cardboard. It's like there's nothing more creative than just using cardboard. I mean, like I have students create chairs and we do masks. We create a parade down the hallway. It's like you could do anything with cardboard. It's amazing.
Man, and then you have campuses that aren't one-to-one. They don't have 3D
Yep.
printers. And so, you have something for everything. And I think that that's great. So it works across the board. So that's good.
And I think that's a great place for us to wrap up. And thank you, Tim, for joining us. And I think the way that we can sum this podcast is if you have cardboard, you can make it a game.
There you go.
I think that's a good way to start. So thank you again for joining us.
Yes, thanks, Tim, so much.
We look forward to seeing you out on the conference front come 2023. I'm sure we'll see you on the streets, as Oliver says.
Excellent. Thank you so much.